Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August Night with the Experts. This is a monthly program by Nuclear Energy Information Service in Chicago, www.neis.org. And this is a program where you get to meet various nuclear experts from around the world, literally, and have an opportunity to ask them questions, enter into dialogue, get to know one another, and we'll have some cross discussion later. Some of you have been here before, you know the drill pretty well. So for some of you, this is your first time, so we welcome you. And we are really, really pleased tonight to have Tina Cordova as our expert for August. The timeliness of this couldn't be better. Many of you have probably seen the movie Oppenheimer by now, and you probably have also, if you've been on YouTube and elsewhere, seen the controversy about the film. My colleague from University of Chicago, Dr. Norma Field, has repeatedly asked over the years, where are the people when we deal with all of these nuclear meetings with the nuclear industry and with government? Because people are left out of it. And many folks feel that's exactly what happened with Oppenheimer. Well, we're pleased to say that tonight's guest will be filling in a much needed gap in that regard. Tina is a seventh generation New Mexican, born and raised in Tularosa, which is the community that actually is the name used for the organization she's part of, the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. This organization is dedicated to not just studying health effects and getting compensation for nuclear victims, but actually getting justice for the nuclear victims from New Mexico, who after all these decades still have not been treated fairly by the United States government. Those of you who got the link tonight, I'm sure you can read English, so you probably saw the bio. The important thing is that tonight you're going to hear a lot of information that you haven't heard before. And most importantly, at the very end, I'm sure Tina is going to ask you to do a few things, because talk is cheap. We need to walk the walk. So I'm going to stop yakking there and turn it over to our guest, Tina Cordova, who I have known and not known for a number of years. I think we've seen each other twice in the last 2 decades, but very, very thrilled to have you here tonight. So thank you, Tina. The show is yours.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the introduction, and to be able to work in this same space with you is actually a huge opportunity for me. As David said, I am the co-founder organization called the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, or TBDC for short. We started this work 18 years ago. I've been doing this work for 18 years. I identify as a downwinder, a New Mexican, and a cancer survivor. The truth is, most people don't know the history that I'm going to share with you because it is a forgotten history, and because our government has suppressed this history and made sure that most people don't know or understand the history. Tonight, what I want to do is talk about the test itself for just a few minutes, and then I want to talk about our lifestyles in 1945 that actually produced the overexposure to radiation aside from the bomb itself. And then I'm going to talk to you about how we have been left out of the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and how we're fighting for justice and to be included for the first time ever. And I want to talk a little bit about the Oppenheimer film and my reflections on the film. So I'll start with making sure that everybody knows, and for those of you who have seen the movie, there's that famous line in there about how Robert Oppenheimer's 2 loves in life were New Mexico and physics. And when he was able to establish the Manhattan Project in New Mexico, he said he felt like he had joined the 2 loves of his life. That was very unfortunate for us. And the truth is, he was a sickly young man from a very, very wealthy family, and they would send him here to convalesce with a Mexican family that lived in the alpine forest of northern New Mexico. And that's where he learned how to ride horses, hunt, fish, and enjoy our most beautiful, pristine alpine forests. That's how he fell in love with New Mexico, and probably fell in love with the simplicity of life here. So they established the Manhattan Project. We are a cradle to grave state. The cradle is the opening up of the earth and the extraction of uranium. And so most people don't know this, but across the what we call the uranium belt, the Navajo Nation, Laguna, and Acoma Pueblo, we have 1,000 abandoned uranium mine and mill sites where they extracted 32 million tons of uranium. The largest open pit mine is on Laguna Pueblo. It's called Powati. It's about 45 miles away the crows fly from Albuquerque. And about a year and a half ago, I had an opportunity to visit there, and it was astonishing. I don't know how else to sort of categorize it, because they're still raising children less than a quarter of a mile from that open pit mine. And when you look out at the landscape, you can actually see what is, New Mexico sort of high desert landscape. And then what are tailings, because there are these yellow hills and there's some sparse grass that grows there, and it's yellow too. It has taken on that same color. And so it's very obvious what is natural and what is not natural. And truly, these sites are super fun sites. Most of them have not been addressed, and we continue to raise our kids adjacent to them. Then we have the development of nuclear devices in New Mexico. Everybody's familiar with Los Alamos. And into the 1970s, they freely dumped the waste from Los Alamos into the canyons around there. Obviously, that made its way into our waterways and eventually into the Rio Grande. And the Rio Grande is the water source for everything south of Los Alamos, which includes many pueblos and, towns like Albuquerque, cities like Albuquerque, and towns all the way to El Paso and beyond. And we have a lot of agricultural endeavors that take place here that rely on that water as a source of irrigation. And then we are the only place in the country where there's a permanent repository at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, where we store transuranic waste or low-level nuclear waste. But we're under consideration right now and fighting very hard to keep out high-level waste as part of what's called Holtec, private industry that wants to establish a facility here to bring high-level waste and to store it basically in casks above ground, bringing it here on rail cars from all over the United States, across all over the United States. And it's not just a problem for the people in New Mexico, although it'll be the biggest problem for us. It can become a problem for anybody, because they'll be bringing the waste from the East Coast, the West Coast, around the Great Lakes, the Gulf of Mexico, et cetera. It'll traverse all parts of the country. And I just recently learned that they will keep the routes secret to try to not alarm anyone, and also to make sure that terrorists don't know the routes that they regularly use. They will have armed guards on it, although I don't see the use of that, honestly. We're greatly concerned about this because a lot of that waste is plutonium waste, and we already have been victims of plutonium waste, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So we truly are cradle to grave. No part of our state has been left untouched. We have been the victims of one atomic bomb, one precursor to Trinity, and then 2 plowshares tests that were done in New Mexico as part of construction excavation projects. So no part of our state has been left untouched by this industry. As far as the Trinity test is concerned, that was the only time that our government detonated a bomb on a platform 100 feet off the ground. And I want to make sure that everybody understands, and if I'm saying things that you already know, pardon me, but there are many people that don't understand all this history. The things that our government knew as a matter of fact before Trinity is, number one, that radiation was detrimental to human health. That was a very well-established fact in 1945. And many people say, well, they didn't know what they were doing, and that is not true. They were creating a weapon of mass destruction. They knew exactly what they were doing. They also knew that the bomb was going to create massive fallout. And how and why did they know that? Because in May of 1945, using conventional explosives, they detonated a bomb out on the Trinity site. They laced it with plutonium, and then they followed the fallout and tracked and traced it and knew ahead of time. The other thing that was happening is that they were planning to do this in July, detonate this bomb in July, and that's our rainy season when we have these massive thunderstorms that move in. And the meteorologists that were assigned to the test were warning against it because they knew they were going to spread radiation all over New Mexico and beyond. But we had to get that bomb detonated before Potsdam, and so there was a rush to carry this out whether people were harmed or not. They didn't warn us before or afterwards, and people lived as close as 12 miles to the test site. Within a 50-mile radius, there were 13,000 children, women, and men living there in 1940, so the number in 1945 was probably larger than that. The government has always said that the area was remote and uninhabited, that no one lived here and no one harmed, but I am here to stand firmly against that because we've taken the 1940 census data and we've drawn the maps and we've drawn the radiuses around Trinity. And this is going to be the most astonishing thing. At 150 miles, there were 500,000 people living here. We had El Paso at 120 miles south, Albuquerque at 120 miles north, Santa Fe at about 145 miles. So they detonated the bomb on a device 100 feet off the ground. To make sure that it detonated that night, they overpacked it with plutonium. They put 13 pounds of weapons-grade plutonium in the bomb when only 3 pounds were necessary for the fission process. A full 10 pounds of plutonium went up in the fireball that exceeded 50,000 feet. The estimates are that the fireball went 50 to 80,000 feet high. It went past the atmosphere, penetrated the stratosphere, and actually went around the fallout went around the world. What we know now, because of a recent study just released by a scientist from Princeton University, is that in those 10 days directly after Trinity, New Mexico, all of New Mexico, received high levels of fallout deposition. And 46 states, Canada and Mexico, were also recipients of deposition from Trinity. Plutonium is just one of the isotopes we have to worry about. Obviously, there's strontium and cesium and iodine. Iodine decays rather quickly, but strontium and cesium stay around for more than 30 years as a half-life. And plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. Those people who were alive at the time witnessed and were able to tell their stories afterwards have said that an ash fell from the sky for days. And now the fallout deposition mapping that's been completed shows that indeed that's what happened. The fallout basically started to go up and then remained over New Mexico for a number of days and then started to go away from the site. Why is that part of the story so important, the deposition? Because we lived very organic lifestyles. Number one, we didn't have running water in 1945 in most places in New Mexico. So we collected rainwater. That was our primary source of drinking water, water that we used for cooking. We also used water that came to us through our acequias or irrigation ditches, streams. Some towns had small holding ponds. And so every bit of the water that we utilized for cooking, drinking, cleaning, bathing was actually as a result of the rain that fell from the sky. There's a process called rainout where when it rains after a test like this, it likely brings down the largest particles of radioactive material, and we believe that that's what happened. And we didn't have electricity, so we had no grocery stores. We literally produced all of our food ourselves by our own means. We had gardens and orchards. The town I lived in was an Eden. I mean, we had every type of fruit growing in our orchards, everything you can imagine in our gardens. And we had fertile soil, and we raised cows and sheep and goats and chickens. And when that wasn't enough, we hunted small mammals and birds. And we had everything that we needed, but now it was totally destroyed. And unbeknownst to us, we changed to nothing because they told us nothing about the dangers associated with this. And I always say that they counted on us to be uneducated, unsophisticated, and unable to stand up for ourselves. There's a story in the history about how they visited a ranch that was fairly close to the site in the days afterwards. And they went there to see how the people had fared. And they were dressed in Tyvek suits with rudimentary Geiger counters. And the rancher said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "We're checking for radiation." And he said, "You won't find any because we don't have a radio." Many, many people have said, well, it had to be kept top secret, and so they couldn't warn you before. But when you don't have a telephone and you don't have a TV, and only a few people have a radio, and newspapers are printed seldom and shared, then secrecy is not really an issue. I think that's such a lie that's been told forever. I think they just honestly didn't care. And I'll tell you a little story that speaks to how little concern they had for human health. Carrizozo is a town about 35 miles away, the crows fly, from Trinity site. Primarily a town inhabited by Hispanics, Mexican Americans, who have lived here, I always say, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because just as adjacent to the Trinity site at White Sands National Monument, they recently found footprints that date back 23,000 years. So we've lived here forever. But in Carrizozo, they positioned monitors, men with Geiger counters, and they were positioned in other towns too. We just have never been able to access the data or the information that was kept the day of the test. But in Carrizozo, we do know this part of the history. When the meteorologists and the physicians that were assigned to the test finally convinced General Groves that he should prepare to evacuate a few people, he lined up cattle trucks. We have active rail systems through all those little towns. We don't move cattle in New Mexico in July because of the heat and because it's inhumane. Our roads were dirt roads back then. And so I have a good friend. Her name is Bernice Gutierrez. She was born 8 days before the bomb in the small town of Carrizozo. And what I envision is her mom wrapping her in a blanket, and her mom and her dad being basically herded into a cattle truck where you can't sit down, where it's filthy, where there's not proper ventilation, and then being driven away over dirt roads to where we don't know. They set a threshold at Carrizozo, and at some point when they reached the threshold, they said, "Go ahead and evacuate people." When they did finally reach the threshold during the day on July 16th, 1945, they doubled the threshold. They met that threshold and they doubled it again. And then eventually they just said, "You've got to leave because it's not safe to be there." So we were horribly overexposed to radiation, and the government essentially has looked away. There's never been an epidemiological study of what happened to the people afterwards. As a matter of fact, we have documented those sorts of things because our government has refused to come back and take part in anything that looks useful to us. And so we accumulate and gather health surveys from people and have well over 1,000 of them. And I'm right now receiving about 6 to 8 in the mail every day. And what I can tell you is that in my family, I'm the 4th generation to have cancer since Trinity. I had 2 grandfathers alive at the time, great-grandfathers alive at the time, who died within 10 years from what was called stomach cancer at a time when we'd never heard the word cancer in our communities. Everybody was afraid to be around them because they thought that they could catch it from them. Both my grandmothers had cancer. My dad died from cancer without risk factors for the type of cancer he had, but he was a 4-year-old child consuming mass quantities of fresh cow's milk, drinking, contaminated water, eating all the fruits and vegetables from his mom's garden. And my dad developed, without being, well, let me just say this. I've been saying this recently. My dad had a cancer very similar to the cancer that killed Robert Oppenheimer, but my dad wasn't a chain smoker and he never drank a martini. My dad didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't use chewing tobacco, had no viruses. And the first cancer was at the base of his tongue, and they had to remove part of his tongue. He was on a feeding tube for over 18 months. He went from being this very vibrant, strong, capable, handsome man to being reduced to almost nothing. But he survived, only to then have his teeth start to fall out because of the radiation that he had to have to his head and neck, and it had destroyed the circulation to his jaw, and his jaw could no longer support his teeth. And then he got prostate cancer, which was a walk in the park compared to what he had already been through. Eventually, he developed cancer at the forward part of his tongue. It wasn't metastatic. They knew that because they were able to look at it on a cellular level. And because my dad had already had all of the radiation he could humanly have, they put him on real high doses of chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy killed him. I had thyroid cancer at the age of 39, and the first thing they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? Did you ever work with radioactive isotopes? Have you ever had a lot of x-rays? And I basically said no, no, and no. But I lived 45 miles from a test site. And now in my family, we have a fifth generation. I have a 23-year-old niece who was diagnosed with thyroid cancer in November. She's in college in California. Her life has been upended. And I wish I could say my family was unique. We are not. We document these stories over and over. My mom has a tumor that's being followed. My sister's had skin cancer. I only have one sister. I've lost my mom's only sister to cancer, my dad's only sister to cancer. It just goes on and on for us. And there's a phenomenon taking place now where younger people are getting sick. I know of two very young children in Tularosa, where I'm from, a town of about 3,000 people, a 9-month-old child that's been on chemotherapy since he was 2 months old, and a 2-year-old child that had to have one of her eyes removed because she has eye cancer. When we get sick, we get really sick. And so a fund has been set up since 1990 to take care of downwinders and uranium miners that mined uranium before 1971. That fund has been established to take care of people who live downwind of the Nevada test site. New Mexico was consistently downwind of the 93 above ground tests that they did there. That's well documented because our government put monitoring stations in place to monitor the fallout. But we've never been included in the fund. We are fighting for justice right now. We are as close as we've ever been after having bills introduced in Congress for 13 years. Never a floor vote on the Senate or the House floor. And July 27th, just recently, our champion, Senator Lujan, worked with Senator Crapo, who they've been working together for over 10 years on these bills. They were joined by Senator Hawley from Missouri, who wants to add the people who live in the St. Louis area. When they enriched uranium, they dumped the waste in a dump site there, and now it's working its way into their waterways. And so they passed, using the National Defense Authorization Act, they passed an amendment to add not only New Mexico, but the states of Colorado, Idaho, Montana for the first time, and Guam, and also add the entire states of Arizona, Utah, and Nevada, where only a few counties are inside of the program currently. It would also add the post-71 uranium miners, and people often ask, why were they left out? Because we still mine uranium in some parts of the country, not here, thank goodness. And the reason that they're left out is because in 1971, uranium first became commercially available, and our government, because this is how they do things, decided that industry would take care of you if you got sick, and nothing like that has ever happened. Industry has declared bankruptcy long ago left New Mexico and hasn't taken care of a single person that has developed cancer as a miner after 1971. So we're fighting to be included in the compensation. And I will just quickly say, and then I'll close out, when they came here to establish the Manhattan Project, they invaded our lands and our lives. They literally invaded our lands and our lives, and they walked away. They never had concern for us. As a matter of fact, there was a full lack of concern. Fast forward to 2021, they came here to film the Oppenheimer movie. We're a poor state. 47% of all the people in New Mexico access healthcare through Medicaid, the highest in the nation. We also carry some of the highest levels of medical debt. Just released study. We have less than 2 million people here, and we're carrying $881 million, almost $1 billion in medical debt. They came here, they used our tax incentives, they invaded our lands and our lives, they filmed this blockbuster movie that will likely make hundreds of millions of dollars. And when we outreach to them and ask them to consider just including a panel, just a panel at the end of the movie that would reflect on the sacrifice and the suffering of the people of New Mexico who were fully engaged into service of our country as part of the Manhattan Project and the Trinity test site, they said they were not interested. And we did this at the highest levels. I'm friends with Olivia Fermi, Enrico Fermi's granddaughter. And when she reached out to me in January and said, do you know about this film? And I said, of course I do. They've been filming it here in New Mexico. And she said, we've got to get them to include your story. And I said, have at it. Maybe the last name Fermi will mean more than the last name Cordova, because they have not paid a bit of attention to me. And so she contacted Kai Bird, one of the authors of American Prometheus. He said he would reach out to the filmmakers and got back to us and said they're not interested. And so it was a total invasion of our lands and our lives again, and it's nothing more than exploitation. And so I think I'll stop there. That's a good stopping point. And I will be glad to answer questions or, have a discussion, however you would like to proceed.
Well, thank you, Tina. It's hard to proceed from a story like that, but clearly this is the kind of stuff that never made it into the movie Oppenheimer. And I appreciate you sharing your personal life to the group as well. It means a lot. All right, so we'll move to the next portion of the event. And couple of things, a little bit of housekeeping I want to get through before I hand it off to my colleague, Jan Budart. I want to remind folks that tonight's program is being taped, which includes the question and answer session. And the tape will be eventually edited and put up on YouTube. We're also saving the chat, but you're welcome to save the chat once we open it up. In the chat, you're going to find information or share information with one another that might be useful. So that could be helpful. And I know Tina wants to put and has put some information in there already, which we'll duplicate for the rest of you. So those are two resources you'll have available by the end of the evening. So again, thank you, Tina. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Jan Budart, who is a board member of NEIS, who will take you through the Q&A part of this event. Jan?
Thank you very much. And great thanks to Tina Cordova for being so honest with us. And I'm in charge of the Q&A, which it's now about past the hour. And Tina has requested that we end in 1 hour. So that, which means that if you wish to ask a question, we're not letting follow-up questions tonight because we're not going to be going over time. And so if you want to ask another question, you'll be at the end of the line. And when we're through, when we don't have any more people asking questions, you can ask your second question. So I would like to just open it up now to people who have something they want to say or a question. Oh, before I do that, Bob Croteau just showed himself. I wanted to introduce the board members of Nuclear Energy Information Service that are here. And so I'm going to introduce Kathleen. Kathleen Rude, would you mind saying a couple of words and telling people about NEIS and your part in it?
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm still processing what Tina said, and I'm just really I'm just really overwhelmed with what you shared and how many people have been suffering for generations and being ignored and disrespected. And so I just deep bow to you, Tina. I mean, I just and for all that you, and I'm just so grateful for your courage and your conviction to keep to do this work and to share this with us. And I'm and later on, I want to know what can we do? What can we do to support you and to support all the people who continue to be impacted? This is just horrible, and it's just horrible. So I'm not sure what else I can say at this point. I'm the treasurer for NEIS, and yeah, and I'm just I guess that's all I can say right now.
And if you do call NEIS and David isn't there, you'll hear Tina's voice or Kathleen's voice telling you that please leave a message. I'd like next to introduce Bob Croteau. He's I guess it would be Croteau. He is the newest board member, and well, it's the second time he's been on the board. He had to drop off before and came back. So we're glad you're here, Bob, and please say hello.
Hello, Tina. That was very, as I say with Kathleen said, I'm almost embarrassed that I went to see the movie knowing that they totally disrespected you. That were the perfect opportunity to address it, and they missed that. But anyway, I was too busy the last time I was on the board a few years ago because I was working on a couple other boards. So I retired so I could come back to NEIS full time. Wait, no, I'm kidding. But the way a lot of the other board members, the amount of depth and attention they give this, it's very humbling. And I hope I can keep up the speed on this track race that they're on. So anyway, I'm happy to be here and to see what I can do.
Thank you very much, Bob. And I'm Jan. I'm the sort of secretary and the facilitator, so-called, of Night with the Experts, although this one was totally facilitated by David. Okay, would anyone like to ask Tina? Most people know, you go to the bottom of your screen and there's a little circle there with a smiley face that says reactions. Click on that and it will say raise hand. And if you do raise your hand, it's going to be much more easy for me to call on you. But if you don't raise your hand and you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat and we'll try to track it. Also, people sometimes want to make a comment and they don't want to make a question. And if you put a comment in the chat, we may end up reading it or asking you to read it. So our first question comes from Kristen Schrader, Freshett. Kristen Schrader, Freshett. Please ask your question. Thank you.
Tina, thank you so much for what you told us about all your efforts. And I'm touched and overwhelmed by both your knowledge and your eloquence and your goodness. So bless you. Quick question for you. I've worked with ATSDR and lots of other downwinders at the Hanford site and in New Mexico. If there's anything I can do to put you in touch with some of them, I guess I'd like to know whether you're overwhelmed. So I don't want to sound like one of the persons asking, have you done this zillion thing too? But by any chance, have you been in touch with the Nevada or the Washington people? And is it possible that you could send people like me who often write op-eds or scientific articles, send me information and I can hopefully work with you to get out more information about your case?
So I'll address your question, Kristen, but I first want to acknowledge Kathleen and the sadness that you've shown and the kindness and the empathy. Kathleen, I appreciate it so much. I've lost track of the number of interviews I've done since they released Oppenheimer. I think it's well over 50 of them at this point. And It's never easy to do this. It's never easy to share all of this. You can well imagine that people here have been so traumatized by this that, you know, we live with a certain level of stress all the time associated with it. And so I appreciate your empathy, Kathleen. And Kristen, I actually work with what we call a frontline coalition of people. It includes downwinders from the state of Utah, Idaho, Arizona, Guam, and it includes uranium workers from Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. And we have a very organized presence, actually. We work with other organizations from across the country. And we have been very strategic. As a matter of fact, I won't take credit for what happened in the Senate recently, but I was forwarded a video of Senator Hawley giving this impassioned speech on the Senate floor. And I contacted Senator Lujan's office and said, have you all seen this video? If you haven't, you need to watch it. And I would highly suggest you reach out to Senator Hawley. He's on Senate Judiciary. I never in a million years thought that he would work with Senator Lujan. It's a most unlikely pairing to actually get the votes. And so we do work with people from all over the country. We would be grateful for an opportunity, Kristen, and I will put my email address in the chat. We will be grateful to forward things to you and have you utilize your voice to amplify what we're working on and what has happened here. And not just here, but I mean, my brothers and sisters that live in places like Utah and Idaho and Guam have similar experiences. It's always kind of frightening, actually, how similar. There's a woman in Utah, her name is Mary Dixon, and she's a thyroid cancer survivor also. And I always say she's like salt and I'm like pepper. We don't look at all alike, but we're both as passionate about this work. And we both have, I always tell her, that special thyroid necklace that we share. And we're so dedicated to this work. We always say we're going to do it until we find success or until they bury us in the ground. And so we would love to have you amplify our voice if there's an opportunity for it. And I'll be glad to put my email in the chat.
Thank you very much for that answer, Tina. And will people please note that you will be receiving the chat. I believe David sends it out to everybody whose email is in the audience, and there's now 40 of us. But he just entered a New York Times article by Miss Cordova that appeared it appeared on the 30th of July. And you can, when you get your chat in the email, you can click on that and read the article that was published by the New York Times by the lady we're honoring tonight with our Night with the Experts. Does anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question? I guess we're all kind of, okay, so we'll call on Dave.
Thanks. We have a saying here in Chicago, Tina. It's a political saying. It's other people have used it too. Don't get angry, get even. And with the release of Oppenheimer and the total disrespect that it shows, I'm curious how you feel this movie can be turned into an opportunity. Or maybe you've already done some things that have done that, but what are things that you would suggest people here tonight could do to utilize that platform that and turn it around on them?
Well, I will tell you that a few weeks ago, I have a friend that tracks social media, and she contacted me and she said about 90% of what's tracking on social media about the Oppenheimer movie is about the downwinders in New Mexico. And so that was very sweet knowledge for us. Right after the New York Times op-ed appeared, 73,000 people saw our website in 1 week. The movie has given us an opportunity to share the counter narrative. I said earlier, it's as if that whole project took place in a vacuum because they don't portray us at all. You don't see a single person portrayed in that movie. I mean, from the very part where they show them looking at the Pajarito Plateau and they make it look like it's just this open expanse. And the truth is, they ran the people off, took their land via eminent domain, slaughtered their animals, burned their crops, and those people never recovered. And then those men had to go to work building the roads, the bridges, the facilities, and then eventually cleaning them. And they were highly exposed to radiation. Some of them lost their lives in explosive accidents. And they won't show that in the movie. They don't show how they bust the women from the pueblos nearby, and they're the ones that cooked every meal, cleaned every house, changed every baby diaper, but you don't see that. They don't show the ranchers that live 12 miles from the Trinity test site. And I always say it's such a disservice, but we are now receiving attention in a way we never had been able to before, because this catapulted the issue to the forefront, not just the New York Times article, but we were on the front page of the Washington Post, and there's been Associated Press articles that have gone out all over the world. And like I said, I've probably participated in 50 interviews since the movie release. So it has helped us. And what we are telling everybody at every opportunity is that people need to reach out to their members of Congress. They need to let their members of Congress know that this is important to you. And I always say to people, once you hear this history, once this history has been shared with you, if you remain complacent, then you're complicit in what took place. And so everybody has somebody that they can reach out to. I mean, Senator Durbin is important to this. He will be part of the team that reconciles the NDAA. I could see all of you placing calls to Senator Durbin's office. And whether it's Senator Durbin or somebody else, or your members of the House, because now the House members become very important. They voted 61-37 in the Senate. It was truly a bipartisan vote addressing a nonpartisan issue. And we never see a vote of 61-37. Every Democrat except Manchin voted for it. And then that would mean we had about 11 Republicans vote for it. Never happens. It's just short of a miracle. So I hope that answers your question, David.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that if you do have comments instead of questions, I have to limit you to 3 minutes. So let's go to Kathleen. Kathleen, your comment or question, please.
Thank you, Tina. So I wanted to follow up more on the what we all can do, and there was so much information that you were sharing. So this legislation that you were just talking about, can you say again what that was, and is it still was it passed, or are there specific legislation that we need to be trying to get passed and supported?
Okay, so many months ago, the House of Representatives passed their version of the National Defense Authorization Act, and it does not include our bill. But the Senate passed their version, and it does include our bill. Now they're going to go into reconciliation or conference, where the leaders in the House and the leaders in the Senate will come together and decide what they keep in the NDAA and what they scrap from the NDAA. One of the things they tell us on a regular basis is that it's going to cost too much. The program has been in place for 33 years, and it's only paid out $2.5 billion. We spend $50 billion annually just maintaining our nuclear arsenal. 50 billion a year versus 2.5 over 33 years. It's a pittance. And so don't ever let anyone tell you it's going to cost too much. And so now we need the House members to know that this is the honest truth about this, is that the states that we're trying to add are Republican states, and we get a lot of pushback from Republicans about the cost. And so clearly, clearly they're voting against their constituents if they don't support this. And we are going to continue to remind them that they can become part of a winning process, because that's what it is now. A vote of 61-37 is overwhelming, actually, in our Senate. So they can either become part of a winning process, or they can be forever known, I guess, as those people who robbed us of justice. And so reach out to your House members and to your senators, Senator Duckworth, and I'm not familiar with who all the House members are from Illinois, but it's easy to locate them by Google searching, and you can send emails or you can call.
And again, when you're saying our bill, if you could just state again what that bill is, so that we know.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be the amendments to the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, RECA, Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And in the NDAA passed by the Senate, it was Amendment 1058.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. David S. I don't know for sure who you are. Would you please ask your question?
Sure, it's David Silverman. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I'll try to honor that 3-minute limit, maybe even beat it. Two things. Your mention of Erica Fermi raises a story here. I'll say it briefly and then a question about this. Fermi, when he did the back of the envelope calculation here that indicated Chicago might be blown up in the original reactor testing, got together with Conant and Groves to establish what is now the Argonne Laboratory site. That was built by immigrant labor who were paid sub-minimum wage right at the end of the New Deal, who were started to organize themselves. On the basis of that, they changed their minds after the real estate deals went in, and instead they put the Chicago pile under the stadium, the University of Chicago, without having really changed the calculation, as I understand it, of the threat. And the stories you're sharing of what's happened with people there around the properties of, well, all of New Mexico and beyond, and the workers there is very similar level of callousness. But that kind of storytelling hasn't been told about the Manhattan Project. So thank you for raising this. I have a question about the act itself and this notion that it's tied to the Manhattan Project. I realize we're at the deadline in this. You've made enormous progress to make it happen. I worry, though, that as we're doing $1 trillion weapons build out and new reactor bailouts federally and statewide, that by framing things as radiation victims from the Manhattan era, which is how I understand the bill is framed, we provide an opportunity for people to continue to regard this as a legacy of the past rather than ongoing. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that framing of narrative result, in particular when you look at the current and ongoing exposures to workers at Metropolis, in St. Louis, and in the communities surrounding them, and from current generations of nuclear weapons and energy production. So those questions then about any reflections you have on the Fermi story, but also how to reframe so it's not just about the 1940s consequences, but the current consequences in these sorts of acts and this kind of compensation.
Well, I think there's a lot of things we can do to frame the conversation, David, because of what I mentioned at the beginning about transporting high-level nuclear waste all across the country. I mean, we have to start to frame these conversations about how it's not just then, it's now also. I agree with you. And there are things taking place today that we can use to frame this so that people realize this is something that took place during our country's quest for nuclear superiority, and not just in the 40s, but all the way through the testing at Nevada took place through the 90s. And so it wasn't that long ago that they stopped. But I think the way to frame it is to talk about how, as a matter of fact, the 2 nuclear labs in New Mexico next year will have a budget of $10 billion. We're about ready to spend trillions of dollars on building new plutonium pits that we'll never need or never use. All of these things are part of the narrative because there's no way to produce. We have no no good ways for dealing with the waste, and yet we proceed fully with this, and we are the living proof of why we have to be very aware of the consequences of moving forward with these very with these processes that do have a downside, and the downside is the legacy that people have lived with since the very beginning of all of this. And so, you know, when we talk about it, when I talk about Holtec as an example, I always say, if you think that industry is going to come back, think again, because the government hasn't come back to clean up the messes that they've made. Nobody comes back. They just simply walk away. And so we can always frame these things based on what's happened and based on what we're looking at in the future with our government's plans for building new plutonium pits and moving nuclear waste all over the country.
That's an excellent answer. Go ahead, Dave. Anyway, David wanted to say thank you, and I'll say it for him. And now I'm going to call on a person who's a member of NEIS. And when I do that, I would like to thank the members of NEIS who are here. There's a lot of our members who are in the participation tonight. And we want to thank you for coming and for participating with NEIS on a long-term basis. And so I'll call on NEIS member Joyce Good. Are you still there, Joyce? Unmute. You're muted.
Sorry about that. It muted itself because I had. So thank you, Jan, and thank you very much, Tina. I really, really appreciate this. I saw the film. I had no idea, and they actually in the film made it look like the people who were doing the tests, the Trinity test, didn't even know that how bad it would be, because they had them just simply put their heads down and hold their heads down while the bomb exploded. And then when they came up, they had a little piece of plastic, it looked like, to look through so their eyes wouldn't burn from the light that was emitted. So it really gave you an idea that instead of your idea that they absolutely knew and they didn't care, that they actually weren't aware because they were exposing themselves. So I would like you to comment on that. And I would like also to say, I definitely will call my senators, but we have a very liberal city council, and I think a very progressive city council in Chicago. And it might not hurt to, I will try to reach out to the members, the aldermen and the mayor, that they might actually bring this up. And bringing something like that up in the city council is effective because it's local and you get a new group of people who might never have heard it before. So thank you again. I would like your comment, Tina, on the movie itself and how they actually maneuvered people.
Well, I think one of the first things to say is that you reflected on how they really didn't know exactly how this was going to proceed. And they were taking bets right up until the end that they might ignite the atmosphere. And Arjun Makajani and I had a conversation recently about that. And he said, imagine they still proceeded. They didn't even know for certain that they wouldn't ignite the atmosphere, and they still proceeded. It's profound to think of. But what I can tell you, Joyce, is for the people who shared their recollection of that day, it was so frightening and so large and so bigger than anything they had ever experienced. I mean, imagine people living these very organic, simple lives, you know, and then one morning before dawn, they're knocked out of bed. I mean, the blast knocked people out of bed, shattered their windows, everything fell from the cupboards, knocked them off their feet if they were outside. The light was brighter than any day because it was brighter than the sun, produced thousands of times more heat than the sun. And people didn't know what was happening. So what did they do? They fell to their knees and they started praying. Mothers gathered their children up in bed with them and started praying. I will never forget the stories that people have told me about that day and about how we live in a real-time world where you can pick up your phone right now and you can Google search. If you were to experience something similarly, you would be able to know within minutes what you had experienced. Imagine not knowing what you had just experienced and not understanding it, and it being bigger than anything imaginable. I had a woman tell me one time that her grandmother had developed very advanced Alzheimer's, and the only story she remembered, she didn't remember who anybody was, but she would always say over and over, "Did I ever tell you about the day they detonated a bomb by our home?" And she would tell the story, and it was that impactful for people. And so, you know, I just have a hard time giving anyone a pass card for what they did. I think it was clearly a demonstration of their lack of concern, like I said earlier, for human health, not only ours, but theirs as well. Olivia Fermi has shared with me that her grandfather, her grandmother, and her mother all died from cancer. They all lived in Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project. And so, you know, unfortunately, this was a project undertaken by our government, and they were going to see it through come hell or high water. And we have been suffering ever since. And living under the cloud of it too. You know, we've never ever been able to shed the threat of the use of a nuclear device, and we live in a very precarious time right now. And it's just unfortunate, it's very unfortunate that they were so adamant on moving ahead with this project.
Dave?
Thanks. I may be violating Jan's rule of one question only, but since I'm
Oh,
only-
no, but you're the only one with the hand up right now.
That's right. So I'll follow myself too. But this actually follows up where Joyce was a minute ago. The notion of council resolutions. There is enough gray hair on this call tonight to remember that decades ago, there was a national movement for enacting nuclear-free zones, and Chicago is a nuclear-free zone by council resolution, and many other large cities around the United States are. So my question, the simple question is, are you aware if any such resolutions exist in the context of getting justice and compensation for radiation victims that could be shared? And perhaps maybe this could be the next aspect of the national movement on, radiation victims. And I'll take your answer, and then I'll have a sort of a follow-up to that in a minute.
Well, we certainly know that there have been cities in New Mexico that have passed memorials and resolutions similarly, David, and we use those, obviously. I mean, even the Western States Governors Association, totally bipartisan organization, has sent a resolution to Congress. And then just yesterday, we found out that our Attorney General was able to get 13 other attorneys general to join him in a letter that they sent to Congress, expressing that they believe Congress needs to act on this post haste. And it was a wonderful letter because it had citations. And, one of the things I haven't talked about is how we had so these kinds of things are very useful, David, and it's something that we should obviously think about. Absolutely. I think it could be very useful. And I think what happens when you get a memorial or a resolution out of a city like Chicago, what happens is people pay attention to that, right? They may not care about the resolution we have out of Las Cruces, but when you start getting these resolutions out of some of these larger cities, people pay attention. So I think it could be useful. And we would be glad to have that kind of support, actually. And if we started something like this in Chicago, we could then use that as a model and take it to other large cities. I think the city of Albuquerque would pass something like that clearly. Santa Fe, we could start this process for going from place to place and asking people to work on just what you've described.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go in more detail of discussing that offline. The one reservation I have is another political saying is never make any demands unless you have consequences to back them up. You've been at this a long time. I've been at this for 45 years almost. If we can't make consequences that mean something to them, all these pretty words are just forgotten, as you already know. But the follow-up to this, though, is we have experienced in the nuclear power community the unfortunate reticence of linking up with the nuclear weapons activists and weapons community. And this is a decades-long thing where the two just do not seem to collaborate together. All the wonderful work that Plowshares does out of San Francisco, they won't touch nuclear power, even though I said to Bob Cirincione's face once, we've already had nuclear war. It's called depleted uranium. We used it in the Middle East, we've used it in Yugoslavia. We've already had a nuclear exchange, but they won't go there. My question to you on this is, what kind of response are you getting from both of those communities, the nuclear reactor community, the nuclear weapons community? And if you're not getting a response, what kind of response would you like to get from us and from them?
Well, I can only say that because our state is so heavily influenced by the two nuclear labs that we have here, they're not embracing us. David, if you're thinking that might be something they would do, it's not going to happen. I mean, there's a whole group of people in New Mexico, a very large group of people in New Mexico that make their living at the two nuclear labs, and I think a lot of them find us to be a huge distraction to the work that they do and the funding that they're looking for to secure their jobs and their futures. But Los Alamos has the highest incidence of thyroid cancer in the country. So I always say, I guess, as long as when you die, you have a good job, it really doesn't matter.
I may not have been clear. I was curious more about the activist community that deals with nuclear and the activist community that deals with nuclear power and waste.
So we
are getting enough support, and if not, what do you need?
We are getting support from the activist community around, weapons production, but we're not really getting, and this is, I'll be honest with you, the first time I've engaged with an organization that's looking out for the nuclear power industry. And so we could use support, absolutely. We have to be very, very careful as we go about lobbying for this. And I think you guys will all understand, because as a matter of fact, one of the primary sponsors of the bill in the Senate, Senator Crapo, is clearly in favor of nuclear power. And so are others. So we have to be very, very careful that we don't bite the hand that's feeding us right now. And so we walk a very fine line, but there's a lot of nuclear activists, anti-nuclear activists that are weighing in on RECA. We just have to be very, very careful about how we engage in that process. And we're not naive. I mean, this is just the facts. This is just how we have to deal with things. And it's come from doing this work for all these many years and learning along the way that you've got to be very, very focused on what your mission is, and you can't be distracted, and you have to be able to say, as a matter of fact, oftentimes, David, as an example, people will tell me, well, the bombs were necessary to end the war. And I always say, we have to look at this, we have to unpackage this from that narrative. We can't look at this as part of that narrative any longer. We have to unpackage it. We have to be able to look at this through a different lens today. And we won't allow you all to link us to that issue. That's not our issue. And so we're just very, very careful, but we'll take any support we can get.
Very good. Very good questions and ideas. Okay, let's call on Dave Lockbaum. What are you wanting to say?
Thank you. First, Tina, I appreciate the information. It's very informative, very helpful. You mentioned about 50 interviews since the film came out. I was kind of curious as to what talking points were resonating most with the media? And what information did you try to convey that ended up on the cutting room floor that the media didn't pick up on and you wish they did?
Honestly, they've been very good at picking up on the most important points. I think everybody wanted to know how we feel about Oppenheimer, and then that opened the door for us to be able to talk about the real truth and tragedy of, the nuclear legacy in New Mexico. There's really nothing that has been left out. We've been able to communicate about RICA, what it has meant to be left out, what it has meant for our communities not to be afforded any sort of assistance. And the one thing maybe, David, that people don't report on very often is the negative economic impact it has had on us as a state. And let me just very quickly tell you about what that means. So as I've traveled all over our state, I've heard stories from countless people. And one story that I will share with you, I hear often, and that goes something like this. I had a really good job. I had a retirement account. I had good insurance. My wife and I were looking forward to our retirement. We were going to help our kids go to college. But I always had this nagging pain in my stomach, and there's no doctors where I live. So my wife finally said, "You're going to see a doctor." She made an appointment for me in a town 80 miles away. I saw a gastroenterologist. They ran some tests, and then very soon they told me I have stage 3 colon cancer. They then sent me to an oncologist in El Paso. I have to drive 200 miles round trip 5 times a week. I had to finally quit my job. I'm on Medicaid now. I've taken out all the equity in my house. I've spent all my retirement. I've maxed out 3 credit cards. And my kids are now sending me Visa gift cards so I can buy gas to go to and from. I've paid thousands of dollars in co-insurance, deductibles for medications, for chemo. And most days I wish I would die so I wouldn't be a financial burden. So we get locked into this cycle of poverty because we never develop generational wealth. And our kids suffer greatly because of this. And this is the story I hear in the uranium mining belt and the story I hear all across New Mexico, especially in those communities closest to Trinity. So that may be one of the things that people haven't heard in these, in all these interviews and in all of the attention that we've received. It just doesn't seem to resound for people. But I can tell you that for those of us in New Mexico, I mentioned earlier, we have the highest use of Medicaid of any state in the country, and we're carrying all this medical debt. It's unbelievable to me that less than 2 million people in New Mexico are carrying close to $1 billion in medical debt. Obviously speaks to how we just can't break out of the cycle of poverty. If you never get a chance to develop any kind of generational wealth and you're burdened with this kind of debt, it has huge economic impact, and then it snowballs into all kinds of social issues that we clearly see and experience.
Lynn, would you like to ask your question or make your comment, please?
Yeah. I just wanted to go back because I wanted to speak before this person did, because it was on track with what you were talking about, unpacking this from we have to fight the other country. And I wonder why you're resistant to that concept, because I mean, it's a dark hole because you have to go to, well, it's that country's fault, and then that country did it because of this other thing, and and keep on going back and forth. But I'm a curious person, and I just always want to know what it was before that. And I think there's an overall value that goes to the fact that atomic bombs don't solve the problem. They make the problem worse. So for that reason, it doesn't make sense to be talking about whose fault it is, and we have to defend ourselves from Russia, or Russia has to defend themselves from us. But I just wondered why you were kind of stuck on concern about not unpacking that. Because I think on the contrary, I feel differently about it, I guess. I guess I have a right to disagree.
Well, and I totally understand what you're saying, Lynn. Some of the most gracious people I have ever met have been the Japanese journalists that have come here to interview us, and I have made close friendships with many Japanese journalists, and will forever regard them highly because their graciousness is beyond belief. I mean, I haven't met a single one that holds a grudge for what we did, and I'm very much not in favor of what we did. And I feel like I can talk about this because I have a grandfather buried in Belgium who died in World War II. He was never even brought home after his service. What we did in Japan, I believe, was not necessary, but it's like I said, we have to unpackage that issue because we still have members of Congress. As of just 2 years ago, a congressman from California refused to even allow Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez from northern New Mexico to add an apology to the NDAA. They fought even an apology to us, not a dime associated with that. And these gentlemen gave these impassioned speeches about, it's really too bad what happened, but we had to do the test at Trinity so that we could drop the bombs in Japan and end the war. And it became very clear to me when that happened that there are still people that have that view of this, and they have power. They're in positions of power. And so when I say we have to unpackage these two things, I'm just clearly stating that there are people who will fight us. If they will fight us for an apology, they're going to fight us about.
What was the apology?
Well, there is an apology associated with the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. There is an apology built into the bill. And so when they passed the bill in 1990, they offered an apology to the people who were considered downwinders of the Nevada test site. But an apology from the government has never been given to the people of New Mexico or other parts of the American West and the Pacific Islands. And our representative was clearly just trying to enter an apology be given to these people. And there were members of Congress who fought it.
Thank you. And does anyone else have a question that they would like to bring up to Tina? I don't see anything in the chat of people making statements that need to be read. And oh, Kathleen, do you mind if I read yours? Thank you very much, Tina. Oh, I'm sorry I have to leave early. I so appreciate all that you shared and all that you were doing. Obviously, Kathleen appreciated it very much. I guess she's had to leave. I wonder if it would be okay if I share my screen for just a minute. If I can get it up here, I'm hoping. Can anyone, let's see. I'm looking for the thing I'm trying to share. Just a minute, please.
There's a map of Western states, but it's very narrow that appears.
Let's see if I can get it. Oh, is that the, do you see this map now?
Just California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington.
Well, maybe it's not going to work. I don't, I'm not sure that I know how to share the screen, but what it is a picture of the fallout from the Nevada test site and a picture of the fallout from the explosion in Los Alamos. And it's really very sobering to look at this. It's new because it's been in the last 3 or 4 months that the fallout has been really measured completely across the United States. So before I let Lynn have another go, is there anyone else who wants to make a comment?
Jan, can I just say that the map that you're trying to share, and I don't have access to it readily, or I would share it. This is the Princeton study that I mentioned earlier. And the young man did the fallout deposition mapping for Trinity. And then he did the fallout deposition mapping for all 93 tests in Nevada, above ground tests only. And it is sobering. Once it's in peer review right now, and then eventually a paper will be released. And it is very sobering. I was able to speak with the group of people that worked on this project, and as a matter of fact, one county in New Mexico, Socorro County, which is closest to the Trinity site, if you take a look at the deposition in Socorro County, as it relates to not just Trinity, but the 93 tests at Nevada, it's got the fifth highest deposition. And so that speaks to how we were not just downwind of Trinity, but on a consistent basis, we were downwind of the Nevada test site as well.
I'm just really trying hard to get this up, but I can't figure out how to do it. Because like you say, you were downwind of all the tests, and everybody in the United States actually was. Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
Jen, can you send it to someone that knows how to open it?
Well, you go ahead and ask your question,
Okay.
Lynn, and I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd like to see it. My mom died from plutonium at Rocky Flats in 1957 exposure. Of course, I can't prove it, but I know it. She died 12 years later on the second biggest fire at Rocky Flats, the Mother's Day fire in 1969 of leukemia. So I get it. But when you said this bomb could stop the wars, on the contrary, this bomb starts the wars. And I'm in constant paranoia that we're going to have another nuclear event. And I'm frankly quite surprised that we haven't yet, and I don't think things are improving at all when from war to war, and now a really big revised Cold War with Russia. It's just like, when are we going to get over it, for the need for all this? And like you also spoke of, the deprivation because of the monetary expense and the whole industrial complex and everything. I'm really surprised that we haven't had, and it's so ironic that we were the ones that did the bombs, and yet we're to be trusted as a result. That's a very odd thing, that like we're the hegemon of the world. I think that's all temporal. Tomorrow we're not. Tomorrow we're going to be the opposite. And that's not a good feeling.
Well, I do think that when people learn the history that we share, they understand, I think, a little bit better what it means. There's no safe use of a nuclear device. You may, even limited nuclear devices, you may survive, but if you get exposed to high enough levels of radiation, it's the beginning of the end for you. And we know that all too well. We know that all too well.
In as much as we don't have other people wanting to make comments at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Dave, and he can, we still have 10 minutes left. Dave, what would you like to do?
Well, as I've said to my family many times, if you have nothing to say, please don't say it. But we white folks have a real hard time with silence. I know it's a problem. No, Tina, this has just been an incredible, overwhelming experience. I don't know that we had any expectation exactly, but you sure cut through the head stuff and went to where it needs to go, which is in the heart and really appreciate you sharing what you have tonight with us. I want to mention just a little touch on something that just came out like 2 days ago, because it reflects back, I think, on one of the David's earlier questions. We have a lot of Davids on the call tonight. There was a German study that was just released that indicates that the effects of radioactive fallout from the testing has been far longer and far more long-lasting than was realized. And this came out of Germany. They did studies of wild boar thinking that the cesium they were measuring was from Chernobyl, which is reasonable because a lot of it is. What they found, though, is that the particular isotope of plutonium is traced back to the nuclear weapons testing. So this is a present day problem. It is not a historic problem. And now we have data to show that. I see you're nodding. You want to comment on that? Then I'll let you have a moment there.
Well, what I wanted to say is, and I missed saying this, or maybe I did, and maybe I went through it too fast that I don't even remember telling you all, but there is a professor from Northern Arizona University that has come to New Mexico over the last few months and taken soil samples north of the test site, because at that time we didn't have the fallout deposition mapping, and our government always told us that the fallout went off in this orderly fashion over the northeastern part of New Mexico, the most unpopulated parts of our state. And we always said, that's baloney. It's not what happened. We know it's not. But he has come here now, taken soil samples, and he has found plutonium as far north of the Trinity site as a little town called Truchas, which means trout in Spanish, Truchas, and Michael Ketter, exactly, and 200 miles from the Trinity test site. So we're living with the consequences of this still today. I mean, we're talking about a radioactive isotope that has a half-life of 24,000 years. To me, it's dreadful because, you know, what do we do? I mean, you know, you just, do we all up and leave New Mexico? I mean, it's just craziness. But now we know that there's plutonium with a footprint associated with Trinity, and there's plutonium in New Mexico with a footprint from Nevada. And Michael Ketter is taking a look at all this, and he's the same way, he's gonna write a scientific paper that'll be peer reviewed, and we will know that the people of New Mexico and probably many parts of our country are still living with, you know, the plutonium left from these tests. And then we also have, and you guys may have heard about the Tooth Fairy project, where we have people working at Harvard with the baby teeth that were submitted back in the 50s and 60s that displayed strontium back then. And what they're planning to do now is try to locate all these people and see what were the health consequences of concentrating in strontium in your baby teeth. I think it's brilliant for them to do this. It's going to tell us a lot about what those of us who were growing up during the Cold War experienced, what health consequences were associated with our exposure to radiation during that time frame. And I think it will be just mind-blowing for most people to learn that these people suffered significant health problems as a result of concentrating the strontium in their teeth and the rest of their bones. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't just go to your teeth, it goes everywhere in your bones. So.
All right, as we get into the housekeeping, I want to just give you one last opportunity to tell folks here what to do. It's always nice to tell people what to do, and here's your opportunity. Oh, you're on mute somehow.
Sorry, David. First thing I would do, I think, is when you have an opportunity, Google search your members of Congress and send them a quick email and tell them that you are in full support of the amendments to the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and that you want to express to them that you're hopeful they'll support justice for people in the American West who were the collateral damage to our country's quest for nuclear superiority as we went about, you know, as we went about detonating 94 bombs. There were more bombs than that, but only 93 actually detonated in Nevada and one in New Mexico. So.
All right, well, we had that in the chat, and the chat will be available if people don't save it on their own to send those messages to Congress. So again, thank you for being with us.
I was
tonight.
wondering if I could just read Carolyn Treadway's message that she put in the chat. I so appreciate your presentation, Tina, and all that you have done and do to help your people. Thank you for sharing. Blessings to you and your people. And I did want to just mention one thing, and that is Michael Ketterer can tell where radiation came from and when it came from there. He uses a technique called mass spectrometry, and it's revealed, even when there's a mill that has contaminated an area, you can tell from the hot particles or from the discrete radioactive particles that they came from that particular mill. It's really an amazing thing that he can do.
I see there's a request for a website. Tina, do you want to drop the URL for the website in the chat, please? That would be good. And while she's doing that, I want to let folks know that we will be back in the end of September, on the 28th of September. And currently, the tentative topic is going to be the controversial decision that came out of the Fifth Circuit Court concerning centralized interim storage of nuclear waste in Texas. A very conservative court has said that the NRC can't force it. And that's really going to cause a lot of issues and problems. So we are going to be discussing that in more detail at the end of next September, at least as we see it now. So again, I want to thank you, Tina, for being with us tonight. I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening for this event. Please share the information. We will try and get this program up on YouTube as soon as possible, so you can even send that link to your congressperson and get them to watch it. So thanks, Jan. Nice job tonight. Thank you, Tina, for being with us. And thank you all for joining Night with the Experts.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody for coming. It was a really lovely time, Tina. Thank you.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Bye-bye.